On today's show, Darrell and I are talking about the transition from offseason to preseason. Welcome back to Strategic Baseball Podcast. Hey guys, so here in Oklahoma at Athletic Mission, where Darrell and I operate out of, we are transitioning our guys from offseason to preseason. A pretty important transition that needs to happen to get guys ready to play here in the next 5, 6, 7 weeks when games start. So on today's show, we're going to talk about this transition and the mistakes that we are seeing during this time of the year. Geoff and Darrell here, and we are a part of a group of baseball instructors and coaches that you probably have never heard of before. We don't rely on cookie cutter evaluation to assess and judge baseball players. We don't judge players on physical talent alone. In fact, we do the exact opposite. We use strategic assessment and individualized training that we know can help any player get better. Because we are fighting against too many players and parents giving up on baseball too soon, we have to evaluate players differently. We have to do things more strategically. We don't have the ability to pick our players from a huge pool of talented players. Every day, we have to take players where they currently are and build on the skills they currently have. So, we focus more on building a strategic advantage mindset more than the physical talent early on. So how do we do that? How do we convince players to believe in themselves? If you ask some high school coaches, college recruiters, or pro scouts, they'll tell you that it's a waste of time. Some players just don't have it. Yet, it's happening every single day. It's happening through strategic assessment and hyper-individualized training that we call Strategic Advantage Baseball. This is Strategic Baseball Podcast, and these are our stories. All right, Darrell, man, as always, I'm going to let you kick this off. On today's show, we're talking about the transition from off-season to preseason and the mistakes that we tend to see during this time of the year.
Yeah, man, I think this is the piece that we've been waiting for. I mean, everybody, has worked their tails off all off season to get to this point. And I think you and I see it a lot here at Athletic Mission. The biggest questions we get is really about not just the transition from the workouts and the training and the excitement that comes with practicing, starting at some schools and high schools and places, and colleges getting ready to launch and go. It's really now, how do we make that mindset shift? And then literally, how do we start throwing, our throwing programs and our preseason bullpens? And I think you and I take, again, a different approach, because it's not really based on the get your kind of in shape mentality. Like, our big focus is making sure that these guys show up the first week of the season. And honestly, even before that, we want them to show up in the scrimmages. We want them to show up those last 2 or 3 weeks in preseason and already be in game mode. And so I think that's something that, as we talk about that today and kind of the biggest issues that we see, a lot of times it really is. We kind of wonder about that transition from off season into preseason. And really what we mean by that is that the workouts, the kind of the mindset about what we ought to be doing, what we need to work on, and how we take those off-season gains and really start refining and turning them into our baseball skills. And so I think some coaches take the approach like we use. We got some individual stuff that we want to work on, and then obviously we got the team stuff we want to work on. And so I think a lot of times, as coaches start practice up, and it really depends on their philosophy, is when we see the things that these guys have been working on the all off season. And then when they get with either the high school coach or the college coach, and it seems like that they start screwing with that player. They start making adjustments. They start seeing things. And I know that's going to be a sensitive subject with some of these coaches, but the reality of it is, as we started sitting here and helping these guys really understand all the work that you wanted them to do this offseason to get ready and to get better and improve. And then I think a lot of times we confuse these young players, especially because if we're really focused on our physical skills, our physical capability, and we don't help them really understand how that additional velocity or strength or power or whatever it was that they really like focused on this offseason to improve and get better at, how we take that and build baseball skills with it. And then specifically that individual players, in the pitcher's sense, like how do we take that additional velocity and power and really turn it into quality pitches? And I think sometimes that's lost in translation. We just automatically think that, hey, man, we got bigger, faster, stronger. I did a different workout, man. I moved better. My mechanics are cleaner. And somehow that magically turns into better pitches and then eventually turns into a better strategy. And the truth is we know that, we see that here every day, that we drive that piece home, that, that our training in the off season has got to lead to us understanding how we use that additional strength, power, explosiveness in the preseason to really refine and really kind of what we call master our baseball skills that we're going to use that season. And so I think inside of that, that's the piece that, as we talk about that transition from off season to preseason, and then really how do we use that preseason practice and to really drive making sure that we're ready the first week or two of the season, because ultimately when we see guys struggle, here in Tulsa, a lot of the times, and this, Geoff, you've done it longer here than me, you see that if they don't have a good first week or a first, 3 or 4 games, then it almost kind of sets the mindset that, hey, man, like I'm going to be scrambling. Like everything I did is not working. And it really does. It starts having a psychological effect on them. And so that's the piece that when we talk about that transition, literally, then that's the thing that today, as coaches and players and parents, man, as we have this conversation, that if we don't take this piece serious and we just kind of look at it as practice and I'm just kind of killing time until, the games start for real. If we don't start having that mindset, that strategic advantage mindset shift, like we're going to start focusing on mastering our pitches and having a strategy and game planning, then you know what, we're going to show up in the first couple of weeks of the season. And if we have some tougher competition and really start, facing some hitters that are ready or facing some pitchers that, are ready, then we're going to see these kids struggle. And I think that's the conversation that you and I wanted to have today, and kind of how do we avoid those pitfalls? And I think a lot of it truly is like the intent of our practice. And when we start talking about, for pitchers specifically, everybody has a throwing program. If you're a high school player or a college player, you have a throwing program, or you should. If you don't, then, we got deeper questions than what we're going to talk about today. But let's just assume that everybody's got that throwing program. And now that we're moving into our preseason bullpens, and literally, what we want to take away from the bullpens. And I think, Geoff, this is where you and I see the disconnect all the time, because you and I are constantly asking these guys that as they started high school practice and the guys that came home from fall ball getting ready to go back to college, it's like, hey, what are we really doing to master these pitches? Like, what are you doing to really start getting the feel, to start seeing that pitch move and feel that pitch? And then, when you are literally throwing your bullpens, what are you taking away from it? And I think just asking that little bit of a deeper question drives the conversation almost to like, we have that kind of stunned silence at first, like, what are you really talking about? Like, hey, man, I'm working on my pitch. No, man, like, I want to know seriously, if we sit here and made you throw that pitch to that specific location 10 times, could you do it again and again and again and again and again? And then if we said, hey, now it's 3-0, could you throw that pitch in and in the zone for a strike? And then I think you start to see that light bulb moment happen for these guys. Like, hey, you know what? Baseball and in season, success in season is really that transition from what I'm capable of doing to what is my opponent trying to do to me. And I think that's the emphasis that you and I, like, we try to drive home to these guys, that the off season is about you getting bigger, faster, stronger, working on your measurables, your athleticism, anything new that you want to add to your game. The preseason is about, now we got to start dialing in and really getting focused on our baseball skills. Like what are we literally going to use in season, and really start refining and mastering that. And then you and I, we focus in the last 3 or 4 weeks of preseason, no matter who we're sending off to get ready. It's like, hey, now let's start playing games now. Let's start strategically thinking. Let's start throwing specific bullpens that we call game plan pins. Like, you know, like we're going to execute our game plan. And so a lot of times I use the analogy like NFL teams, like, you know, they're game planning throughout the week. Then they implement their package that they want to, the base package they want to try to run against the defense they're playing that week. And then the quarterback is going to go out there, and the coaches, and they're going to run through this as they practice it. And so that way on Sunday or Saturday night or Monday night, whenever they're playing, they don't show up shocked. You know, there might be some adjustments that the defense made and some different things that the other team tried to do to your offense. But the reality of it is that the reason these quarterbacks and teams have success is because they watch film, they had a strategy, they created a game plan, and then during practice that week, they implemented the game plan. They went and practiced that game plan, and then on game day made the adjustments as they needed to. And I think pitchers need to think that same way. We need to think that, hey, man, that my strategy is going to drive my game day success. And if we're on game day or we're in season and we're worried about preseason things, then we got a problem. If we're in season and we're focused more on mechanics or trying to learn how to throw a pitch, you know what? It's probably too late. It's too late for at least that pitch, that right then. We're going to have to play. And I think that's the piece that, as you and I really, you know, get hyper-focused on these last 3 or 4 weeks of preseason and how we make sure the guys here are ready in season and have a great first couple of weeks, that really kind of sets the tone for their season and these shorter high school seasons specifically, then I think that mindset shift and that ability to start strategically practice and starting to implement kind of the things that we would want to do, whether it's the pregame routine, the pre-pitch routine, and really dialing in on, you know, facing hitters. Like, how do I want to go through and honestly kind of game plan for the first week or two of the season? And that's what we do here to try to make sure that we help these guys have these transitions from off season to preseason. And then obviously now as we work through preseason, how do we help them show up that first week or two of the season to make sure they get off to a good start? And honestly, the coaches trust them and believe in them, and kind of they're meeting those expectations of not only of themselves, but of the coaches, and kind of getting off to that start, man. It kind of sets the tone. And so that's kind of the conversation and the takeaway that I want these guys to have today from the pitching side is really like them last 3 or 4 pins. We can't just, you know, be working on pitches. Those last 3 or 4 pins, and we need to really be getting what we call game plan pins. Like, this is what I would want to do. I get loose. Here's how I would want to maybe throw the first 3 hitters. And then as we get deeper into the preseason, getting ready to go into in season or into scrimmages, like, we are laser focused on, you know, the quality and the execution of our pitches, not just trying to get a feel for my pitches. And I think that little bit of a mindset shift and a practice change and a focus is really what sets these kids apart that are ready the first week or two of the season than the ones that kind of just mindset wise ain't ready, and then kind of get exposed in first couple of weeks. And then, you know, a lot of them are struggling to try to catch up from that point forward.
Right, absolutely. And man, like you already said, when we talk about the biggest issue with the transition from off-season to preseason, it is that mindset, what we're working on, how we work, and that takeaway. The off-season is great, and this is where we can kind of decompress and really start to focus on getting bigger, faster, and stronger, and making any necessary adjustments that we want to make mechanically. And so when we get to the preseason, you and I, then we turn our focus to baseball skills. And so for us on the hitting side, it's that sixth process. So again, we talked about the sixth, the first S being seeing that ball, turning over our senses to the visual system, heightening up our visual system so that we can capture the cues and clues of what pitch is coming out of that pitcher's hand, and then tracking that ball and judging where that ball is in space. And also understanding that each pitcher pitches move differently, and what that means in terms of the pitches that you're looking for and where you're looking for it at. And then we have the T part of the sixth process, which is timing. And, so hitters have to understand that they need to be on time twice. The first part is seeing that ball out of the hand. Now, this isn't easy. I'm not acting like it's easy, because every pitcher moves differently. Every pitcher has their own unique release window, and every pitcher pitches move differently. So this is what we need to be observing when we're in the dugout, or when we're on deck, or when we watch video, when we study guys. And we need, and then we need to be on time getting our foot down based on where the ball is in space. So when we hear hitters constantly talking about being on time and working on their timing, which is super important, our guys are talking about that. When they talk about being on time, they're talking about making sure that they can see that ball as early and as long as possible, and then getting that foot down. So for them, it comes down to seeing the ball, heightening up their visual system. And that's their adjustment. Their adjustment is not mechanical. In that task, for us, the task is the sixth, that seeing the ball, timing, and getting the right pitch to hit. So that's the adjustment, not mechanics. But then this leads us then to the knowledge of the zone. And this is the time of the year where we really start to talk about, their hot zone versus the strike zone versus the umpire zone versus this particular pitcher that we're getting ready to face, and where he likes to live, and how his pitches move there. Because, man, my hitters hear me say this all the time. My biggest thing is getting hitters to understand that at the high school level, it's only like 6, 7, 8 hits. That's the difference between hitting 260 and 250. And in college, it's only like 8, 9, 10 hits. And then in pro ball, it's like 15 to 20 hits. And so we want to limit the miss hits by not missing your pitch, getting your pitch. What we see a lot is a lot of kids are swinging at strikes versus waiting for their pitch. And really, that isn't their fault, because coaches are jumping on these guys for taking strikes. So I explain to these guys the way we get these extra hits are by not missing their pitch, swinging at their pitch, and taking the pitches that they don't want. And then now the swing is on autopilot. And when the swing is off, it's because somewhere along the task of the sixth, we didn't execute very well. It's not a mechanical thing. So it's frustrating whenever we start talking about adjustments that need to be made, and the coaches are always kind of reverting back to mechanics. So this is our preseason mindset transition. And then we get deep into the game plan BP. Darrell talked about the game plan bullpen. Now we have game plan BP. And this is where we're developing a game plan against the pitcher and what we know about them. and how their pitches move and what they do when they're ahead or what they do when they're behind and so forth. And so, man, these days with PBR, Perfect Game, Twitter, YouTube, man, you can find video or report on a majority of the guys they're going to be facing. And all we're trying to do, man, at the very least, is kind of get an idea of the velocity range, trying to get an idea of how their pitches move, and then how they deliver their pitches, if they tip their pitches at all. And, our game planning is easier than it's ever been. And coaches need to be scouting games. And if they are, that's great. That's awesome. But one thing that we see is these coaches aren't sharing that information with their hitters. And so, come on, man, share the information with hitters so that they have a game plan and they have a strategy to be able to perform at their very best. And then once we have this information, we will then set up the machine to stimulate the pitches and the velocity ranges. And then even go through maybe like some of the tendency. We have one of those home plate machines where we can change the pitches on the fly. So that's really cool in terms of being able to switch between pitches based on the guy's tendencies. And so now when they go through this whole process during the preseason, they feel ready, man. They feel like they're a month ahead of everyone else who's using the scrimmages or the inner squat to get ready. Not us, man. A game is the game, and you need to be ready for game one. Scrimmage, inner squat, regular game, it doesn't matter. A game's the game, and we need to be ready. So Darrell, man, this is the fun part about what we're doing. And like you said, if we're in the in season and we're thinking about off season or preseason and what we should have done then man, it's too late. And now I feel like I'm not prepared, and I likely won't get off to that hot start that we need or that we want to get our coaches to trust us.
Yeah, man. I think when we can avoid just generic conversations, especially for these guys that really do understand their mechanics, they understand how they move, they understand that piece of it. So when they're transitioning with their coaches, and again, we try to create that dialogue. We want coaches and these guys to communicate, because there's a reason every pitcher is different. There's a reason every hitter is different. Not every pitcher throws the same way. A curveball is not a curveball. And so when we kind of just, have the mindset that we're going to kind of mass produce a pitching staff, or we're just going to kind of take this generic, kind of bullpen plan and kind of implement it and say, hey, we're going to throw 5 fastballs here and 5 curveballs here. And the reality of it is that when we start moving locations, or we just give generic locations like a fastball away, what is a fastball away? We want these guys to literally understand, the different areas of the strike zone, because different hitters, a fastball away might be what they're looking for. A fastball up and away might not be. So if we can start getting more specific about location, and really practicing that location, then we can identify as pitchers that there's certain locations that our pitches ain't going to play at. So if a coach keeps calling a pitch in a certain location that pitch just ain't going to play at, that's not the pitcher's fault. And so that's a strategy problem, or it's just really something that we outthink ourselves based on what we just did. And I think the reality of it is we start talking about this transition, and we start talking about game planning and strategy, and how do we transition from off-season, preseason, and preseason to in-season. I think the conversations that coaches are willing to have with players, and players that have been doing work, the guys that have been really preparing, that spent the off-season doing work and trying to really get better at what they do, then I think coaches and players and having those initial conversations about what they've been working on in the off season, and then coaches kind of building on that instead of trying to radically change it just based on a practice schedule or based on this is what we do in practice. And I think a lot of times as coaches, we don't realize the impact of what some drills do to certain type of players. And I think when we just do a drill to do a drill because that's what we're going to do the next 15 minutes of practice, and we don't realize the impact that drill has on that player or on that pitcher, then I think, we wonder why some of these guys struggle, or why guys that are doing certain drills. And I think as coaches, we gotta be responsible enough to know our pitchers well enough, or know our hitters well enough that, hey, not every hitter swings the same way, and not every pitcher moves the same way. And not every pitch is a fastball is a fastball is a fastball. And I think a lot of times as we're transitioning and we're starting baseball practices, we just start with these generic drills or these generic things. And I think a lot of times it's the older, especially for the older kids and the older players, like, hey, man, a drill can kill a movement pattern. A drill can kill the way the kid gets and the way he thinks. And when it starts screwing with his thinking, then obviously we're going to get mixed messages, and we're not going to get the consistency that they've really been working and trying to develop. And I think a lot of times in early season problems that we see, we have that conflict of what they've been working on versus, okay, what did they practice in the preseason? And then all of a sudden that mixed message shows up, and they're just a little bit out of sync or time or confused on opening day or opening week, and they get off to that bad start, and it just kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah, what we see a lot of time is guys get real jumpy. They're just jumping at baseball, and they're rushing their swing. We see it, and these guys tell me the batting practice round is like a rapid fire. And this rapid fire is causing issues, man. It's causing them to jump a ball. It's causing them to rush because they're not given enough time to even set up. And so, and then the other thing that we're seeing, and these guys are telling me, is that, we have these circuit type of practice, like stations, which is great. I'm all for it. But man, if my first station is the tee work, I'm happy, because then I'm going to go tee to front toss to live and then to that machine that's just blowing guys up. But if my first station is that machine that's 40 feet away going 90 miles an hour, blowing people up, man, I'm going to be pissed. And these kids are, and you're seeing their swings messing up. They're constantly jumping at balls. And you know what? As frustrating as it can be at this time of the year, I spent a lot of time with our guys just trying to game plan on how they're going to adjust and do well at practice without stepping back, especially this close to the season. So we're constantly talking about, hey, guys, look, you guys can absolutely get worse at practice, especially when there's no understanding of the takeaway. And the takeaway, no matter what you're doing, has to be unique to the hitter. You can have everyone doing the same drill, and maybe it's an awesome drill, but what's the takeaway for him individually? Yeah,
man, and I think that's it. As we wrap this up, I think that's the takeaway is for players and coaches. Let's have this dialogue. Let's understand the impact of our training and our drills. And if we want to own it and we want the players to own the outcome, then, as coaches, we really do need to make sure that based on, what that individual player needs, that we understand the impact of the drills we have them do and the work we have them do. And if we don't, and we just took the advice off of the internet or from me or you or whoever, I don't care where they get the advice. If we don't understand how that drill truly does, help that player create a strategic advantage or help them refine a specific baseball skill, just doing a drill for the sake of doing a drill can absolutely make a guy worse. And I don't care what anybody says. I'll argue that until we're blue in the face and both choke. It's just not true, man. We don't just mindlessly do anything at an elite level and expect it to magically happen. We have intent and purpose and a takeaway for everything we do. And if we don't, then it was just a mindless drill. And at the end of the day, mindless drills can have a subconscious impact on what these guys do, or kind of just creating a little bit of a timing habit or issue. And a lot of times we don't even realize it. We didn't notice it, and it just shows up. And we're kind of like, hey, man, last week this was pretty good. Now what's happening? And when we start dissecting like what they really been doing at practice and the specific drills they've been doing at practice, and we can identify like, hey man, this drill right here is causing you to have a hesitation in that first move or something right there. And a lot of times that's it. And we try to make 50 different adjustments. And the reality of it is we just kind of built in a little bit of a pause or a little bit of a different first move or a little bit of takeaway out of our glove. And that little bit of takeaway is going to impact everything that happens after that. So really, as we start doing drill work and moving and transitioning, you know, the big takeaway I want these guys to really have is that we got to understand the impact of what we do and why we do it. And if we do, then I think we can see any kid get better. And like you said, man, we can do the same drill, but that player might have a different takeaway or what they need from it. Or you might have some drills that just ain't geared for certain type of players, the way they throw or the way they move. And we need to be able to identify that too as coaches and not just generically have everybody doing the same thing, thinking that's just kind of what we do in the preseason.
Right. And so the takeaway for me is going to be, you know, as we transition from off season to preseason to in season, there is a mindset shift that has to happen as the intent of what we're trying to do during each season is different. And so for us, we're making this shift right now from off season to preseason, and we're getting guys to shift from all the off-season stuff they did into improving their individual baseball skills. So, and then trying to get to understand and have a conversation about what they want to do, what they can do, game planning BP, game planning bullpen, and how we have a strategic thought process and how we organize our thoughts as we get ready for games.
Yeah, man, that's good, dude. Good.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in to Strategic Baseball Podcast. As always, if you guys are finding any value in these episodes, please leave us an objective review and also head over to strategic-baseball.com and join our circle. That Darrell and I got some things we're working on. We keep saying that, but we got some things we're working on that we're getting ready to roll out. So we'll catch you all in the next episode.